Hey guys, this is Chandra and welcome to my channel, SeeChanWrite. My video today is going to be about the evolution of my character development and kind of where I started off versus where I am now. So I started developing characters originally quite some time ago. I want to say more than 10 years ago. And I've been writing kind of my whole life, but I wrote a lot more poetry and stuff like that. I never really thought about what detail went into making a character. I just started writing. And then I started to work on a specific book. And sorry, there's a lot of glare on my glasses. I don't know, you guys can see, it's whatever. I started to work on my first book and then do more research and stuff like that into how you actually go about character development, because I was kind of struggling. I was like, how do you name people? And why does this character seem like I can't remember what I was doing with this character, and I'm just kind of making things up, and then I forget it, and then I'll write the character had blue eyes, and then a few chapters later they have brown eyes, and I can't keep any of this straight. And so I started doing character sketches and the character sheets, and you're supposed to go through and fill out what's their eye color and what's their favorite flavor of ice cream. And it just felt very, I don't know. But, I read all the things and I watched all the videos, and it's you're not the exception. You have to go through and do these things. And so I was like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it anyway. I don't like it. I don't enjoy this process. It doesn't stick anything in my head. It feels like I'm still just inventing stuff. And I don't know what to do about it, but I want to write, so I've got to figure it out. And part of that is just going through the process, even when the process is uncomfortable. So I did that for a while. I did pages and pages and pages. I've got files of it, just where I was I'd print off blank character sketches and I'd go through and I'd fill them out manically, and it was just oh, it was the worst. I hated it. So I had all this character development for the book I'm actually working on right now. And I just kind of shut it away, because as I was going through this process, I felt like I don't have the skills that it's going to take for me to tell my story the way that I want to tell the story. And this is such an important story to me that if I tell it now, I'm going to mess it up. And then I'm going to be really mad about that, because I want this one to be so good. So I set it aside and I started working on something else. So I wrote my first book. It's trash. It's terrible. I knew it would be. I read all the things, like I said. I did so much reading about writing. And a couple things that I found out is you actually have to write to get better. You can't just continue to learn about it, read about it, all that jazz. You actually have to do it. So I started to write. I was just I'm just going to write this book. It's going to be what it is. Your first book's always terrible. I'm okay with this being terrible. And I still love that story. The first story that I wrote. The first book, I should say. I still love it, but I haven't edited it yet because it's just going to be so bad. I'm still just a little bit sad about the idea of having to go back and edit it. I will one day. I promise. I promise myself I will. But I'm not looking forward to that day. Not yet. Maybe that'll come too when I'm a better editor, because I'm still working on that. But as I went through that whole process, I just wrote the story. Things are what they are. Never really put a whole lot of thought into those characters or created character sketches for them. And I learned a lot about writing. I learned so much so fast. I mean, even my first chapter, the first time I had people critique my chapter, some of the stuff that they were critiquing, I was like, what do you mean? And even in school, I skipped a lot of grades, which is a whole nother story. And the only reason I really did well in English in high school was because I could write poetry, and I had a really good vocabulary. And so that kind of carried my grade a lot. I'm not gonna lie. But outside of that, writing was just not. It was very difficult for me. So this is after high school. I'd already been writing, but this is after high school. This is, but also before college. I took quite a bit of time off before I even started any college at all. And the feedback I was getting, some of it was even Like, you're switching POVs a lot. Um, and it wasn't even, I was just like, what do you mean? And so they were explaining to me about POV, and then I go back and I start reading it, and I'm like, well, how do I not do that? And they're like, I don't know, you just don't. And I was just like, ah. So a lot of my first book was like very basic, very, very basic stuff. But for me, it's like, you have to catch yourself doing it. Someone can tell you, like, this is a mistake that you're making with your writing. You have to get to the point where you catch yourself doing the thing and then change that in order to improve your writing. Like, that is improving your writing. Like, a lot of the stuff, someone critiques it, someone will critique it maybe several times before you actually pick up on it and internalize it yourself and take that and put it into your writing. And that's totally fine. So I went through all of that, went back to writing poetry, went back to writing short stories, stuff that I could finish quickly. Took some time off from necessarily continually writing. Like, I don't write every day. I know a lot of people do. That's not something that I do. Would I like to? Yes. Do I carry my phone and, like, have notes everywhere and, like, 10 million notebooks? Yes. Do I have all the notebooks I've ever had? For the most part, I would say yeah. As long as it wasn't, like, something that I had homework in, because I didn't care about those. But if I'd written anything in it, even it was just like, ooh, that phrase, that sentence, I'm going to save that for later. I have, like, all of that. And so I did that, but I wasn't writing every day for quite a significant amount of time. And then I came back to my story after I finished my second book, the one that I'm beta reading right now. And you can watch my other videos, you can follow my beta reading process as well. But I finished that, and then I started asking for feedback about, like, what to do now. And then a lot of people were like, it's so important that you keep writing. Whatever happens, just keep writing. So I started to do that, and I went back to all the notes that I'd had and everything that I'd collected, and I pulled it all out, and I started looking at it, and I was like, this is trash. It's bad. It's really bad. It's so bad. Like, it would be like me going back to the first book I ever wrote and reading through it and saying, man, Chandra, you're changing POV, like, in the middle of the sentence. This doesn't make any sense. Those were my character sketches, and I was just like, oh boy, I don't actually need this. Oh, I just figured out what this is. No, I thought it was my computer. It's not my computer. I don't know what it is. Whatever. Okay, we're good. Yeah. So, character sketches now. Character sketches now look much more like this. So this is the prophecies that I have written across the top. This is part of a character sketch, which it seems interesting because it is actually a scene, but the reason it's still a character sketch is because it's going through a lot of the important things that happen to that character, and into the way that she sees things. So instead of going through and writing an entire page about the character's physical appearance to get in touch with who they are as a person, I'm writing them in a scene. And I actually read about this technique with one of my favorite authors, Karen Marie Moning. When she was writing the Fever series, she talks about how there are some things that she wrote that never ended up in the book and were never intended to end up in the book. It was just to give her a better feel of the characters. And I had liked that idea for a long time, and so I started to kind of play with it. And that was kind of the beginning of being able to write my character sketches and my backgrounds, and thinking about it of what are some characters who are going to interact with each other? What's the setting? So I started by building settings. And again, Jan Marassi has a ton of videos on building, world building and stuff like that. And so I'd watched some of those. I started to work through the environment that way. And I had a lot of the setting in mind. I just had never really written it down. So I did two things here. I started writing those scenes where I would say, like, okay, here's a bunch of characters who are going to interact, and getting them in one room, and then thinking about things about each specific character that might annoy another character, or that would they would rub each other the wrong way, or there would be some kind of a reaction there, and why. For example, I have one character who is very about his palate. He's kind of a foodie. So he gets irritated with another character because they wear very strong cologne. That interacts with his sense of smell, his sense of taste. He doesn't like it. Now, the other character who wears really strong cologne is obsessed with the idea of being seen as clean. So he's showering, bathing, like adding fragrance because he wants to be clean. So his intent isn't malicious, but already there's kind of that friction, there's that interaction. The second thing that I started doing was I took I think it was like maybe an hour-long workshop, and it was just like the basics of I can't think of the words. Copy. It was for writing copy. And it was just going through the basics, and it was talking about naming things specifically in a way that you can improve when you're having a hard time naming things. I realized I have a really hard time naming things. So I took that and I applied it to my world building. So I can see mentally the idea of this place, but instead of just writing down the first thing that comes to mind, because it frustrates me as I'm writing, I find it's an area where I get hung up, I started to write 25 names. It doesn't have to be all at once, but 25 different names for each setting. So those are kind of the two big things that I've been working on as far as world building and character development. The reason that the 25 names for the location is important to me is because I do get hung up on it, like I said, but also it helps me to visualize. I start to refine what that space actually represents, and then putting people into this space, when you're sure of what that space is, you can then get a clearer picture of how it interacts with characters, or how characters have to interact in that space, and the reasons behind that. So that's been kind of the beginning of my character development, and some of the reasons why that's been fun and also, where I started and where I am now. And so I just wanted to kind of document all of that, but I will do more as I get more into it, and there's a lot more to share on it. So I'll be making more videos in this series, but I wanted to start with that. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have comments, questions, different tips or tricks that you use when you're world building and doing character development, if you do them at the same time or if you do them separately. I would love to hear all about it below. We'll see you next time.